Remarks on the mystic doctrine and poetry of the Sufis. The poetry of the East, particularly that of the Muslim majority nations, differs primarily from that of the West, and when taken up by the uninitiated, would often appear to be the mere effusions of wild and voluptuous bacchanals, are worthy of Anacreon himself. These remarks, however, pertain more to Persian than to Afghan poetry, which contains less of the often bombastic style of the former. You know, that it's not using the metaphor of breaking the law, These remarks, however, an approach is nearer to the simplicity of the poetry of the ancient Arabs. A general subject with the Afghan as well as other Asiatic poets is that of love, not human but divine, and a contempt for the people and vanities of the world, whilst other Afghan poets, such as Khushhal Khan, write on any subject that may have been uppermost in their minds at the time after the manner of Western poets. The general reader who would understand many of the poems contained in the following pages must know that most of the Asiatic poets profess the mystical doctrine of the Sufis, the tenets of which it will be necessary to explain to him, although Oriental scholars may be supposed to be sufficiently familiar with the subject. The Muslim writers state that these enthusiasts are coexistent with their religion, and probably their rapturous zeal may have greatly contributed to the first establishment of Islamism. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. But they have since been considered its greatest enemies, and it is avouched that their doctrines have for a long time been even undermining Islam itself. Hence, the most rigorous proceedings have, from time to time, been put into practice to repress their increase. But these, as usual in such cases, have a contrary effect, and Sufism, it is said to be still on the increase. There's no doubt but that the free opinions of the sect on the dogmas of the Muslim religion, their contempt for its forms, well, seeing beyond the forms in themselves at the least, and their claim to communion with, or rather absorption into the Creator, are all more or less calculated to subvert that faith, of whose outward forms the Sufis profess their veneration. The tenets of the Sufi doctrines appear to have been most widely diffused over Persia, and indeed the great reputation acquired by one of the priests of that sect enabled his descendants for above 2 centuries under the name of the Safawiyan dynasty to occupy the throne of that country. The general name by which this sect of enthusiasts is known is Sufi, implying pure, a term probably derived from the Arabic word safa, signifying purity, and by this name all are known, from the venerated teacher or spiritual guide, followed by crowds of disciples, to the humble Kalandar, Darwesh, or Fakir, who wanders about almost naked or only clothed in his kirka, or cloak of rags, subsisting upon scanty alms. To support this voluntarily adopted life of prayer and religious abstraction. In India, more than in any other country in Asia from remote ages, these visionary doctrines appear to have flourished much after the same manner as in Egypt and Syria. In the days of Christianity, the early days of Christianity, that is, as testified to by the early ecclesiastical writers who trace to these countries the mystic, the hermit, the monk, for their propensity to a life of austerity was quite a disease. In the Hindu religion also, as well as in the people themselves, there is much that tends to foster a spirit of religious abstraction, and we may thus with some justice suppose that from India other nations have derived this mystic worship of the deity, but without adopting the dreadful austerities and macerations common among the Hindus, and deemed necessary for attuning unto the state of beatitude. To give a full account of the doctrines of the Sufis, would be an almost useless attempt, for traces of it may be found in some shape or other in all countries alike, in the sublime theories of the philosophers of ancient Greece and in those of modern Europe. The Sufis affirm that their creed is adverse to superstition, skepticism, and error, but it exists by the active propagation of all three. Well, according to who? Error is not just believing something different. Skepticism is not the same as considering things for what they are. A survivals, but going too far. Jibt and Tagut. It's supposed to not be upon Jibt and Tagut, but the doctrines of their teachers are given to their disciples in place of the outward forms and observances of the faith they profess. They are invited to embark upon the ocean of doubt, piloted by a sacred teacher or a spiritual guide, whom they must consider superior to all other mortals and deem worthy of the most pious and spiritual confidence. In fact, of almost adoration itself. They are devoted to the search after truth and are constantly occupied in adoration of the deity. He, according to their belief, is diffused throughout all created things, and they consider that the soul of man and the principle of existence is of God, part of him, not from him. Hence, their doctrine teaches that the soul of man is an exile from its creator, who is its home and source, that the body is its cage or a prison house, and the term of life in this world is its period of banishment from him, ere the soul fell, as it had seen the face of truth. But in this world it merely obtains a partial and shadowy glimpse, which serves to awaken the slumbering memory of the past, but can only vaguely recall it. And Sufism undertakes, by a long course of education and moral discipline, to lead the soul onward from stage to stage until at length it reaches the goal of perfect knowledge, truth, and peace. According to this mysterious doctrine, there are 4 stages through which it is necessary man should pass prior to attaining into the highest state, or that of divine beatitude, where, to use their own words, his corporeal veil, which had previously obscured his sight, will be drawn aside, and his soul, emancipated from all material things, will again unite with the divine and transcendent essence, from which it had been divided for a time, but not separated forever. The first of these stages is termed Nasut, or humanity, in which the disciple is sometimes supposed to be living in obedience to the Sharia, or the orthodox law. Now, Sharia meaning your ideal system of law, the middle path law, in its older roots, you could say. Hopefully it's the correctly believing law. I mean, hopefully what's being labeled as Sharia is under that, but that's the spirit behind it. It's not some whatever people say in the West. And paying due observance to the rites and ceremonies of religion, for these things are allowed to be necessary and useful in regulating the lives of the vulgar and weak-minded, and in restraining within proper bounds, and guiding such as are unable to reach the acme of divine contemplation and abstraction, who might be led astray by that very latitude in matters of faith which instruct and enraptures those of more powerful intellect and more ardent piety. The second stage is termed tariqat, or in the way which the disciple attains what is called jabrut, or potentiality and capacity. And he who reaches this stage quits altogether that state in which he is merely permitted to follow and revere a teacher or spiritual guide, and he thus becomes admitted within the pale of Sufism. All observance of the rites and forms of religion may be laid aside. Well, not really, but